Hello, and welcome to my presentation, Native American Archival Collections, the Challenge of Accurate Representation with Traditional Archival Standards. The thesis statement for the paper is as follows. Traditional archival standards have historically led to the misrepresentation of Indigenous peoples' documents and artifacts. In recent years, there has been an attempt not only to construct inclusive archival protocols to preserve the history of the American Indian, but also to create a conversation on this topic, in order to educate non-tribal organizations on how to best care for this subset of their collection in a respectful way. Please note at the right side of the screen, the Library of Congress record Shoshone Indian skin teepees, and you'll note there is a little sick next to the word teepees. That is because this word is misspelled, and you can see even in this very limited record issues that need to be revised. Moving on to the historical background. Descriptions in archives are generally prioritized by the creator. Indigenous peoples rarely created the images and records in which they were depicted, historically speaking. Archival standards from the Western viewpoint create issues with finding the subjects of historical records. This in turn creates research issues for specific people or topics as the creator is prioritized. Ultimately, this leads to an overshadowing of the subjects by the creator and loss of Indigenous peoples' culture and historical record. Note at right, the Grand Robe painting on a hide, which was on loan to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this is their artwork details, brief record on it. The longest line on here is for the credit line, and unless you knew the object number, the credit line information, the donor, or perhaps the exact title, this would also be very hard to track down. So now incorporating Indigenous archival practices and comparing them to Western archival practices. The University of Maryland was an excellent source reviewed for this paper, and they discussed how Western and European archives have the tradition of the written record. Conversely, Indigenous cultures heavily draw on oral traditions and narrations. Keeping this in mind, there are efforts to increase equity in the archives. Shannon R. Pelva, in her paper, Redefining and Representing Native American Collections and Curatorial Practice, examines Western archival standards as adopted by tribal museums and collections. She reviews Native American tribal efforts to incorporate communal values in their archival practices, and draws a comparison of 3 O'odham tribal museums and institutions and their current archival practices for review on this topic of equity. At right, please note the Child's Raven Rattle, which is through the National Museum of the American Indian. As we talk about equitable ways to bulk up these records that have, in a sense, had elements lost to history, you'll note in the Contact Us line, there is a way for people to make a correction, add something, or if they have a concern as per the collection statement of the National Museum of the American Indian. Continuing on this topic to highlight equity considerations, it is important to also remember that many of the historical artifacts and what are considered objects or historical items in museums and repositories might actually contain human remains. For this, my paper briefly touches on the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, noted there through the National Park Service, and considers how this has been upheld, has not been upheld in the modern day. Finally, I note emerging archival practices in conjunction with tribal cooperation. The big element in this field that I highlight is the Protocols for Native American Archival Materials, which began in 2006. This was a coalition between Native American museums and institutions that house collections and non-tribal institutions that may house Native cultural artifacts. Archivists from Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities collaborated to adopt a working set of protocols by which to structure archival practices surrounding Indigenous peoples' records. On this page, you will note the endorsements for this project. Please note that there is the Native American Archive section of the Society of American Archivists, as well as the Society of American Archivists, and as per their press release in August of 2018, they officially endorsed these standards as an external protocol for their collections. This brings us to the conclusion for my paper. There is an outlook of moving forward with this set of protocols that will incorporate well-documented archival standards of Western tradition while still maintaining, respecting, and considering Native culture and beliefs. And I'd like to finish with a final thought by Catherine Bulow that the archives, the record, can provide not only our people, but all people enlightenment, and hopefully a better humanity will result. At the end of the day, the record itself does pertain to the human record of the people that it reflects and is meant to record. And this can only be accomplished if the record itself is thorough and complete. Here are the references consulted for my paper and presentation, if you're interested in further reading, and the image references for this particular presentation. Thank you for watching. Are there any questions?